Firstly, thank you all for joining us at this commercial income round table. Really appreciate you all making the time to be here. So in a moment, we're going to hear from Charlotte Guyver, who some of you will know already, but is Director of Income Generation at Versus Arthritis, and is also Chair of the Board at an amazing startup called Arthr, which you're going to hear a lot more about. And you'll also hear from Andrew Bathgate, who is co-founder here at Good Innovation. And Charlotte and Andrew are going to spend about 30 minutes or 30, 40 minutes talking about the genesis of Arthr and the challenges that came with it, so that if you're exploring the same sort of opportunities, you can hopefully avoid the pitfalls. Then we'll hear from Ryan Bromley, who's a partner here at Good Innovation. He'll MC the questions, so we'll follow that discussion with questions. So if you wanted to put your questions into the chat as they arise, Ryan will then MC those at the end of the conversation. So as I said, the format is Andrew and Charlotte talking for 30 minutes. Put your questions in the chat. And just to mention as well, we are recording the session, so we're going to be sending it out to those people who couldn't attend in person. So we'll be recording the session. But first, a few thoughts really on context. So I wanted to start by saying that although I know COVID has been a real challenge for fundraising, but I wanted to start by saying that actually fundraising was challenged before COVID. So some of you may know that we set up in 2016 a collaboration, and some of you were actually involved in the collaboration, called the Good Lab, to explore different ways of funding the sector. And we published a report on that at the beginning in September of 2019. And I spent the next 6 months sort of on the road talking to a lot of you, plus another group of fundraising directors. So I had about 60 conversations, 60 fundraising directors, and I wrote a blog on it. Some of you may have read it, but I went back to that to think about the context for this conversation. Actually, I thought it was really relevant. So I'll really quickly run through the 6 insights that emerged from it. So firstly, what we learned from that, what I learned from all those conversations was that actually being a fundraising director was a tough gig before COVID. So I think there was a lot of expectation from CEOs and executive team peers around generating income to achieve even more and deliver mission at a greater scale. But actually the reality was that most of the growth to be had in fundraising was incremental. There were exceptions, but even for those fundraising directors who were delivering substantial growth, when I spoke to them, even they didn't expect it to last. So fundraising was challenged before COVID, and what fundraising directors were doing was they were beginning to explore income diversification anyway. And I suppose in its broadest sense, that's exactly what it is. It is an exploration of how you diversify income. And accordingly, fundraising director roles are evolving. So interesting that Charlotte is called the Income Generation Director, not Fundraising Director. And we're seeing more of that in the sector at the moment. And also what was really interesting about that is that actually income is increasingly being aligned with impact. So money is being made off of mission delivery. And there are pioneers pushing the boundaries and leading the way on this. And one of those is Charlotte, and we're going to hear from Charlotte. And it's worth mentioning that Charlotte was working on income diversification well ahead of COVID hitting. So COVID has created the need to diversify. It didn't create the need to diversify income, but what it has done is exacerbated that. And when COVID hit, what we stopped talking about what we call mission and money, this alignment of income and impact. We stopped talking about that because it didn't seem appropriate at the time, particularly as a lot of fundraising teams were just focused so much on the immediate future. Talking about mission and money just wasn't appropriate. So what we did instead was we helped executive teams think about how they might build back better from COVID. And what we did was we ran a lot of pro bono sessions across the sector on building back better. And if I think about the meta theme that emerged from all of those pro bono sessions, it was a question around how charities can deliver more with less. So income and resources are challenged. So income is down. Lots of people have been let go, as we sadly know in the sector. So executive teams are thinking about how they can deliver more with less. But I think what's really interesting about something like Arthr and Mission and Money generally, this idea of how do you monetize your asset, skills, capabilities and or services. What's really interesting about that is actually, I think that might provide an antidote to that. How do you do more with less? Because actually what Mission and Money allows you to do is to deliver more with more. So Arthr is a great example of that. And at this point, I'm going to hand over to Andrew and Charlotte to talk us through how it emerged. That's all right.
Thanks, Kevin. So yeah, Charlotte and I have got a bit of a plan of a chat. So we're just going to chat. I'm going to ask Charlotte you a series of questions, and we're going to go over, I guess, from start to finish. So where did this project start? What were the genesis of it? And then we're just essentially going to talk through the whole process. So it should take about half an hour. Charlotte, thank you in advance, because I think there's some warts and all stuff in here as well. So hopefully it'll be quite useful. So it's probably a useful place to start in terms of, like, where did this come from? Like, why did you want to start look at diversifying income in the first place?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Hi, everybody. Nice to meet you all, and thanks to Good Innovation for inviting me to this session. It's really nice to talk about things in the sector with colleagues. So that's a really welcome opportunity. Yeah, it's a good question. So why did Versus Arthritis want to look at diversifying income? Well, as Kevin says, you know, I think new ways to find and secure sustainable income streams is something that is always on the mind of any fundraising director. And, you know, every charity has its own context, and certainly we had ours. For us, it really started before we became Versus Arthritis. So that was the result of a merger between Arthritis Care and Arthritis Research UK. And back in 2016, when I first started socialising the idea of income diversification at Arthritis Research UK, the charity then was a deeply scientific grant-giving organisation that just focused on medical research, right? So that was our context. So we were about as far away from any beneficiaries as you could imagine, despite being there to represent about 18 million people in the population with arthritis. But for whatever reason, and I'm a big believer in timing is everything in these things. For whatever reason, the organisation back at that time had a bit of a light bulb moment, and I think realised the need to change, and that meant, you know, transformation across the board. So that meant changing our charitable activity and expanding our portfolio. It meant more visibility with people with arthritis. We looked at changing our organisational attitude towards financial sustainability, and then right through the kind of culture of the organisation. So there was already sort of a bit of a groundswell, which was very helpful. But all of that cost money. And because we'd expanded our charitable remit from just being a grant-giving medical research organisation to providing support and care, that meant increasing our spend from 30 million a year to around about 50, 60 million a year, you know, which sounds really laudable. However, that's when the point that everybody turns to the fundraising director, right? And looks hopeful at you that you're going to magic another 30 million out of the air. So, and the backdrop and the context is really important to kind of lay out, because we had an income portfolio back at that time that was really fizzling out. It was not in a good place. The charity didn't have a history of successful fundraising. We hadn't been professional fundraising for that long. And we were really reliant on two income streams, both of which had very low or non-existent cost bases. One of which was legacy income, and we're still really reliant on that. And one was royalty payments from a successful patent that a couple of our researchers had discovered. And that patent was due to come to an end in 2019. And that was delivering around about anywhere between 10 to 15 million pounds a year without us having to lift a finger. So it was going to be a big hole, and we were sort of heading towards this financial cliff. It had a burning platform. I could see it, and I'm not entirely sure the rest of the organisation wanted to see it. And in addition to that, you'll remember that the external fundraising environment back then, particularly in the UK, was increasingly becoming more challenging, and also we had GDPR on the horizon. So there was no successful income stream in our portfolio that we could just dial up, and we were sort of faced with this bleak horizon, which meant you didn't really have any other choice but to innovate. So we knew we needed to diversify our income streams, and that for me meant looking at commercial or earned income rather than voluntary income streams. So that was our starting point, and that was the point at which we brought Good Innovation to come in and help us with that whole process.
And then fast forward a little bit of work, and you've now got a business, you've got a team, you've got products, you've got multi-million-pound investment, you've got sales coming in. It's like a real thing. Yeah,
amazing, isn't it? I actually have to pinch myself a bit sometimes to appreciate it. But yeah, I guess amongst all the darkness that 2020 has brought us, there has been some positive moments to feel good about, in that we did actually manage to launch a new business from scratch, that I think has a real opportunity to deliver both money and mission, as Kevin refers to it, but also to impact significantly on the 18 million people in the UK. And also, I think, probably would be as bold to say it has international and global impact as well, potential impact as well, just given the business model that it is.
Already been approached to selling to China, haven't we? Which I think
we have, and Africa,
yeah. So I just wonder, for those that haven't seen it already, just quickly describe kind of like what Arthr is.
Yeah. So essentially, Arthr exists to give people with arthritis the opportunity to buy brilliant products that are created with them specifically in mind to make their everyday easier. So that is it in a nutshell. I guess what makes it different from any other charity trading subsidiary is the way it's been set up as a social venture, with the ethos of delivering both profit and impact that are equal. Right, so it has social values right at the heart of it, and that translates across all aspects of the business, such as our supply chain, how we involve people with arthritis in the product development, how we work with our partners, for example, and but we also operate exactly like a commercial business. So for us, the bottom line is always in our sight at all times. So Arthr designs and makes its own products for people with arthritis. So that is deliberately filling product gaps in the market based on unmet need. But it also has quite an important role in deliberately disrupting those markets too. So we really want to move away from the concept that if you're unable to function like an able-bodied person, you can only shop in marketplaces that are for disabled people, or that products available to you only look like they come out of your NHS hospital. So we don't believe that is good enough in this day and age, and that's what we want to disrupt. The other focus for Arthr is to be a curator as well of those well-designed products that for whatever reason haven't got to the market, or are on the market and not reaching enough people, or are not widely available or accessible. So we also have a role in trying to surface some of those great British designs that are out there already. And then I suppose the last thing is to say that its role is also to improve the shopping experience, because we know that there isn't a retailer out there currently that is specifically catering for the needs of people with arthritis. So there's no one that understands the condition like us, or what it's like to live with it day to day. So the sort of product choice and the buying experience is also a really key factor in this as well.
it's been a bit of a long journey. You kind of mentioned earlier on that we kicked off in early 2016, and we'll come on probably the question on everyone's lips: why is it taking so long? We'll talk about that in a minute. But I think before we get to that, it may be useful to outline kind of like what were some of the big chunks of work? What's been the journey that you've been on?
Yeah, I mean, it has taken a long time, right? No, I mean, it really has. So 2016 seems like a really long time ago. But I think the only way to approach this type of work is to do it in stages, and partly because, you know, it's a lot of work, but you also need to be led by what's coming out at each process, at each stage. So we chunked it down, and we started with an audit. And that audit was to try and identify all the assets that the organisation was sitting on. So a lot of asking questions of, you know, what teams were doing each day, understanding the expertise that they held, understanding the programs they were delivering, and understanding the know-how that was in the organisation, and coming out at the end of that with a list of ideas and opportunities. So we had about 25, I think, in total at the end of that process, which then us as a senior leadership team, you know, discussed and narrowed down, and we used a set of really useful criteria to make that decision-making process easier. So we whittled down the 25 to 5 ideas. The second stage was then to take that shortlist and work up business cases for each of those. And some of that was really easy to do because some of those ideas weren't new. They were ideas that other charities and other organisations were doing. So there was a bit of a kind of model that we could follow. But a couple of them were new and were quite, you know, bold commercial concepts, I guess, one of which was the product venture concept. So that did need quite a lot of further investigation, quite a lot of external validation of markets and different sectors, etc. So all of that process from start to finish took about 1.5 years. And by the time we had reached the beginning of 2018, we'd got to the point of having a serious conversation with the board of trustees about investing, you know, quite a big chunk of money, you know, into a retail business, which was about as far away from medical research as you could possibly get. So yeah, really it was a process of starting broad and gradually sort of whittling down with some clear criteria to help the decision making along the way.
So Arthr kind of got its first round of funding, I think it was early 2019 or kind of mid 2019. So that kind of whole process from first conversation to first kind of sizable tranche of funding was 3 and a bit years. So like, why did it take so long?
Yeah, I mean, a whole host of reasons, lots of internal selling, which just takes time, doesn't it? I mean, I'm sure everyone, you know, on this call has experienced that. You know, the fact that innovation and the process involved in challenging the status quo was a bit of a completely new way of thinking for the charity at that time. So taking the time to set it up well, I think was really important. And I spent a lot of time on that. In 2017, obviously we went through a merger as well. And for anyone who's been through that just knows how much organizational time and energy it sucks. So, you know, we probably lost about 8 months because of that, I would say. And then just on a really practical note, there's the sort of trustee and committee timetable. You know, the reality in many charities is that they only meet every 3 months, and finding the right time to discuss something so new and so significant, I just found a bit of a challenge trying to get it on the timetable. So, you know, if you add all of that together, it's amazing how quick, you know, how long you can make something like this last, which isn't ideal, I know, but, you know, it's a learning, I guess.
We'll come back to talk about the joy of trustees a bit later, I think, won't we? Because it's going to be a recurring theme throughout this. Yeah. And one question was about like the cross-organizational working, because, you know, something like this leverages assets that sit in all other places of the organization. You're in charge of income, like there's that whole kind of properly like cross-organizational working. So just curious as to what was the reaction from colleagues? What was the reaction across the organization to this?
Yeah, I mean, it was mixed. You know, I suppose some people didn't really understand why we were asking the question. Some people thought it was a bit of an interference. You know, why was income generation, you know, sticking its beak into my business. There was a bit of that, but then also there were other teams that were really up for exploring new ideas. So I think you always get a bit of a mix, don't you? And you just have to make sure that you keep talking to as many people as possible. I suppose my gut instinct at the start of this process was that we must have been sitting on something that was of value to someone and was not being fully exploited. That was my gut instinct, and that's why we started this process, and I think there are a few reasons for that. The first was that the size of the population that arthritis impacts, 80 million is not a small number, and I knew back then that we just weren't even touching the side, so it felt like there was opportunity there. The second was that we didn't and still don't have a direct competitor in the sector, and therefore, again, there had to be some kind of market advantage for us being the only experts on the playing field. That just felt like an opportunity. And I guess the third, is a really important one, particularly in the times that we're living in. I'm really, really conscious that we're really fortunate of osteoarthritis. We're in a really strong financial position. We have a large amount in reserves, and we certainly had a large amount back then. So I knew that there was investment the investment was available, and some of that reserves needed to be spent down. So there was a kind of financial appetite to spend, which I know it doesn't exist in every charity. So we were very fortunate there. But yeah, I guess without knowing exactly what the opportunities might have been, there was enough in our favour that made me feel hopeful that we could translate something into sort of commercial gain.
Brilliant. So kind of we ended the first stage. We looked at assets. I remember we looked at customers. We found some kind of like exciting things going on. So then we kind of like agreed that we're going to explore a few items, a few ideas in a bit more detail, and essentially kind of build up some business cases for that. So kind of at that point, what was your plan?
Yeah, so we sort of focused in, didn't we, on the product venture idea specifically, because I think we felt that had the most potential, both in terms of scale and size of value. And ultimately, the plan was to make the business case to trustees for investment. So that's what that was what that part of the process was to do. And up to that point, it had really been a paper exercise, I guess. So predominantly using existing insight from people with arthritis about, the assisted living and disability marketplace. So we knew a few things. We knew that the products on the market weren't good enough. That's what people were telling us. We knew that there wasn't a specific arthritis only offering out there. The existing products are being sold, through, as I said, disability retail channels, weren't condition specific, and therefore the sort of horse shopping experience for someone with arthritis wasn't particularly good. And then thirdly, we knew that the unmet need was significant. So, people regardless of age, gender, type of arthritis were telling us that not having solutions available to them was fundamentally robbing them of their independence and often their dignity. And I guess once you know that kind of information, you sort of can't really ignore it. It's out there. You either choose not to do something about it, or you choose to do something about it. So, but on top of that, there was a whole load of stuff that we didn't know, and we needed to know if we were going to figure out if there actually was a legitimate business here, and of course put the business and investment case together. So we needed to know a few things like which products people actually wanted and needed. So I don't know if many of you know much about arthritis, but the range of problems that people experience is immense. They're varied and they're complex. So depending on where you have arthritis in the body depends on what issues you experience. And these can range from dexterity issues right the way through to mobility issues. So things like lifting, sitting, twisting, bending, the list goes on. And if you translate these actions into everyday tasks, you start to build a bit of a picture about how restricting the condition can be. So that was quite sort of complicated to sort of, filter and navigate down. I guess the second thing we needed to know was, and this is really important, was what role should Versus Arthritis play in this, right? Because this is not our core business. Setting up a retail, a product design, manufacturing, a retail business. That was not our core business. And we had to be really clear on, you know, what our role in delivering a solution might be. And we had lots of choices here because, you know, we could have just, you know, made some money available to some very clever designers to make some better products, and we could have benefited from a share of the IP, for example. That might have been one route. Or you know, we could have had a choice on the other end of the scale to be running specific retail outlets that, you know, might curate and sell products for people. So we had, and all the choices in between. So we had a whole range of things that we needed to consider. And then, of course, I think one of the most important things we needed to know was obviously the cost return. You know, at that point, we'd done some really rough estimate around market size and sort of average purchase value. But, you know, we certainly didn't have a full picture of what level of investment was needed to determine the business model. So there was quite a lot of work still to do.
And I remember at this point, the idea was kind of getting bigger and bigger as we discovered that the kind of like the value chain was broken and that we'd have to be kind of end to end. We couldn't just do investing in others. We couldn't just do retail. We had to kind of go like designing, manufacturing and retailing. So I mean, it became massive. Like, what was the appetite internally for something so big and ambitious?
Yeah, the appetite was good actually, but don't forget, quite a period of time had elapsed, so there was enough time to have sort of warmed people up to this. I guess the scale of this possibility had certainly sort of ignited something in the organisation. That is really fair to say. And in fact, I remember the trustees saying to us as a leadership team at the beginning of the income diversification process, to be bold, right? I literally have nightmares about that phrase because it is fixated in my brain. And if you're innovating, that is a gift, isn't it? To be told by your trustee board to be bold. However, with hindsight, I think I probably would have checked in on exactly what they meant by that, because through this process, I've definitely learned that the hard way that sort of my bold was possibly not quite the same as the majority of the trustee board, and their risk appetite was perhaps a little bit lower than mine. But overall, the appetite was definitely there.
And how did it feel for you? Because we did loads of work, like mapped it all out, and like, was this daunting for you to think that you're going to have to kind of build this like massive, great big thing? Did it become too big?
I guess yes and no. I think no, because the stage that we were at, where we were analysing the value chain, so from sort of design, manufacturing, selling, and really looking at that across the piece, that process was so thorough, and it was really clear in my mind that we had to pursue solving the whole problem, right? So the whole value chain was dysfunctional. We knew that. Because if we just fiddled around with one element of the chain, so say, for example, the design element or the manufacturing element, or, you know, the selling, it just wouldn't have made enough of an impact because it was so broken. So any effort would have been lost, and really we wouldn't have really fully realised the cost benefit. So I go on the flip side of that. There was a moment when I realised I was probably going to have to put off the biggest pitch of my life to try and convince a bunch of deeply scientific, conservative scientists that they might want to invest millions of pounds in setting up a design and manufacturing a retail business. But, you know, and that did feel a bit daunting. So I suppose, you know, there, you know, pros and cons, aren't there?
So you took the business case to the trustees. How did it go?
Well, I mean, they didn't commit, right? They said no. It was a bit of a brutal meeting, and definitely my ego took a bit of a bashing for sure.
Why did they say no?
So two reasons, I think. The first was that I hadn't properly checked the risk appetite. I've mentioned that. They said be bold, but I just probably was off the scale compared to them. I had just assumed that as a collective we were on the same page, and I think those differences around comfort levels just hijacked the meeting and took us down a really some really unhelpful rabbit holes. So they sort of, for example, got fixated by Chinese copycatting and that kind of thing. The second was, I just don't think I'd done enough pre-meeting engagement. And, you know, that might sound really obvious to everyone around the table, but the relationship between the exec and the board at that time was quite a distant one. We didn't really interact with them much in between meetings, and actually it was sort of frowned upon to burden the trustees outside of the set meeting structure. I've managed to warm up a couple of trustees, but and I thought that was be enough to sway the argument, but it just wasn't. So I think putting in the time ahead of the meeting is just so important, particularly when there's so much content and detail that needs to be digested. Having said that, though, this is all credit to the trustees. Even though they said no to the investment, they didn't shut the door completely on the idea. And I think because of that, we did end up in a better place for it. So that is my real positive takeout from the whole process. They said to me, go away and do some more work. And at the time, I felt deeply irritated because I thought they were just sort of, you know, copping out of making a difficult decision. But actually, it gave us and me an opportunity to do a couple of things. The first was to test and prove some of the assumptions in the business model and really try and bring those to life and get some real world data. And then the second was, it just gave me more time to engage with some of the trustees, you know, as individuals rather than a group. So actually it was a benefit in the end.
I remember the outcome of that meeting very well. So I remember we decided to change tack. We needed to prove, you know, classic prove that this was a good idea in the real world, and proving the viability of products that you haven't made yet in a shop that doesn't exist becomes quite a challenge. So we ended up kind of creating new products and proving that they were going to sell. So we had a kind of a suite of industrial designers. I think we got one of the guys that designed the Ferrari museum, didn't we? He kind of like got involved. So we had this suite of designers. We ran design sprints. We got people with arthritis in. We had kind of like occupational health people coming in, and we essentially built a portfolio of new products, and we got them designed up to the point of CAD stage, so they would look real, but we obviously hadn't built them. And then we built a fake shop, and we populated the fake shop with all these fake products. And then we built a fake brand, and then we ran marketing campaigns to see if anyone would buy our fake products. So it was quite an exciting stage. Like, how did it feel for you?
I mean, for me personally, it was really invigorating, right? I mean, and all credit to the team at Good Innovation for coming up with such a kind of, I guess, agile and low cost solution to try and prove some of the real world data. Yeah, it felt really positive to be moving something forward, even though we hadn't got a yes from the trustees. You know, it was great to be able to not lose the whole concept and idea completely. And, you know, proving that we could design products with people with arthritis as such an integral part of the process was also really fundamental to trustees' nervousness. So, you know, partly because it was such a new area for us, but also just being able to prove all of that was really critical. And it was a really great process to work on, and a lot of buy-in. Yeah.
So I remember the results were amazing. So just to kind of talk about it, we had two identical looking shops, online shops that we built, and we ran identical marketing Facebook campaigns to them both. One shop was full of our new products, and one shop was full of existing products. So we did a kind of pure A/B test to see what would happen. And it was amazing. The revenue from our fake shop filled with our new products was 4.5 times higher. The Facebook click-through rate was like 4 times higher. The cost per acquisition was significantly lower. You know, wrapping it all up, the ROI on our new products compared to the existing products was about 4.5 times higher. And so we kind of like finally had these numbers, and we had these numbers at a significant scale to go, actually, there is kind of like real world demand here. So what were you expecting? Can you remember?
Do you know what? I honestly didn't know what the outcome would be. I mean, by nature, I'm a bit of a half full glass, half full person, right? So I was quite hopeful that I think that whatever data we got from the results of this, it was going to be really critical in taking whatever the next stage was going to be. So, you know, I think a lot was riding on it, but I think we felt that the process was also quite robust as well, that would give us the right data that we needed.
So armed with all this, how did you then re-engage with the trustees?
Yeah, so the first thing I did was convince the CEO and the board that finance committee should take responsibility of oversight of income generation, because that meant that I had a much smaller group of people to engage with and to influence. And I hope that this would make the investment decision a bit easier. So that was the first thing, just trying to whittle down the numbers practically. And then I just went all out in engagement. I was hounding them, literally, emails, calling them, wanting to meet with them. And I wanted finance committee to really feel the excitement of the project as well. I wanted them to feel part of the innovation journey and the decision making and all the great stuff that had happened over the last, you know, few years. And, you know, we used a few different methods for that. And you'll remember in Good Innovation, we made a video of the whole process, which was a genius idea. Well done. And that was helpful to share with them as well, because that sort of made them feel a bit more included. I think it's very difficult for trustees to be, you know, to get really under the skin of some of the stuff that we all work on. It was hard work because a lot of them weirdly didn't want to engage at all. So I literally did sort of hand them a bit night and day. But I also strongly had a sense that this was the right thing to do, and that this venture did have an opportunity, and therefore, you know, and that the data was telling us that loud and clear. So by the time we got to the finance committee, and I'd spent so much time, you know, talking to them individually, they had had time to digest the detail, they'd had time to ask the questions, to understand the risks, and it got us to a place of having a much better quality of discussion at the actual meeting.
So what was the ask in that meeting?
Yeah, so the financial model I shared with them showed both the profit and loss for the venture. So we did it slightly differently second time round, rather than just plonking a figure up on the screen. So we shared both the profit and loss for the venture, and also the investment and withdrawal scenario for versus arthritis. So how much money we might need to put in, and then how much money we might be able to take out over a period of time. Potential significant payback to versus arthritis should start to flow through by 2023-24, which is good news.
It's always nice to put something in market and then realize that, oh, it's actually going a lot better than the models to begin with, which is great. And I remember we also changed not only kind of how you talked about the numbers, but how we talked about impact to the trustees as well. And it sounds obvious in hindsight, but we started talking about the cost of impact in conjunction with the revenue that will come in, right? Because Arthr is delivering impact, it's delivering a kind of mission as well as money. So cost per impact became quite an interesting metric. Like, did this make a difference to the conversation with the trustees?
Yeah, it did. I'm glad you asked the question, because, you know, one of the ways to manage the risk appetite issue was to compare the venture investment to other levels of investment that was currently being made as part of our charitable activity. So, you know, we're partly a scientific research organisation. So, you know, are used to signing off significant sums of money as grants, millions of pounds, and, you know, often with little information about the actual impact, just because that's the nature of research. But the comfort levels towards that around the board, you know, were okay, because that's the business, they're scientists, that's what they know, that's what they're used to. And likewise, you know, at that time we'd been doing quite a lot of marketing investment and marketing activity to increase the understanding and awareness of arthritis. And again, you know, the return on investment for that isn't always as easy to measure. So those were both quite good comparisons. And, you know, as part of the Arthr pitch, we deliberately calculated a cost per income cost per impact in the venture model, which was really favourable actually. It was coming in back then at under £100. So when you put that alongside some of the cost per impacts and some of the other activity in the organisation, it started to feel a bit less daunting for the trustees, I think, which was good.
Yeah, comparing the cost per impact to some of the like brand marketing campaigns that were going on as well was quite a stark contrast, I remember at the time.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Cool. So trustees decided to cough up, give you the money, give you the first kind of like round of funding, which was awesome. So then there was the I guess hard work about actually starting a whole new business. One of the first things that we had to do was decide what form this was going to take. Like, does it become a versus arthritis department? Does it sit somewhere? Does it get kind of like spun out or whatever? So, you know, you talked about setting it up as a separate entity. So I wonder if you could like explain a bit of the rationale about why we went down that route.
Yeah, so we had, you're right, there were lots of options that we could consider with this, you know, from having it completely remote all the way through to having it just as another sort of team within the organisation, and we considered each of those options in a great amount of detail. Actually, we really spent a lot of time as an exec team going through that. But I think we all felt that that this venture needed to sit as a standalone business, and there are a few reasons for that. Primarily, we just didn't think that if it was set up as another internal department, it would be able to operate like a startup. You know, it wouldn't be able to be agile, it wouldn't be able to be nimble, and it wouldn't be able to be commercial. And that's not saying anything against versus arthritis' culture. It is just, that's just what we know as a charity. We have, you know, there are some sort of mechanisms that don't always enable that kind of quick thinking and entrepreneurial behavior, and we just didn't want it to get sort of sucked in and sort of forgotten, I guess. So in order to protect it and to give it the best chance of success, we thought the only way to do it would be for it to be at arm's length. And also, I suppose, you know, by choosing that option as well, we were also quite cognizant of the fact that none of us on the exec team and no one in the organisation had any kind of experience in setting up startups, especially not retail startups. So, you know, we were also keen to make sure that it had the right support model wrapped around that, and that's you know, that's why having Good Innovations venture studio was also really key in that, to be able to provide its support for in its first few months of starting up.
So how's it been set up and how's it work? Oh, and sorry, quite a few people have asked about the cost per impact, so we'll come back to that one. But like, how's Arthr been set up and how's it work in practice?
Yeah, so it's a company limited by guarantee. It's 100% owned by Versus Arthritis, and therefore, so it's just sort of part of our group in the same way any other trading subsidiary is. It's got its own board of directors. I sit on the board as shareholder representative, and finance committee essentially act as the shareholder. And their role is to have oversight of the investment on behalf of the trustee board, but they don't, or are not meant to, get involved in day-to-day operations. You know, that is definitely the role of the Arthr board. So that's kind of what it looks like on paper.
And how does it work kind of in practice?
Yeah, on paper it looks really straightforward, right? But in practice it really isn't, and I have to just be really honest about that. The oversight and reporting structures are clear between the various boards and committees, and Arthr's got a set of business control documents, so things like P&L, risks, cash flow, all of the usual stuff you'd expect, that we review as an Arthr board every month at our board meetings, and that's also shared with the finance committee so they can do their oversight job. Alongside this, you know, we've got just an absolute plethora of legal documentation as well that supports the partnership between and the setup between Good Innovation, between Versus Arthritis and between Arthr. You know, there's the loan agreement, there's the cost sharing agreement, there's IP transfer, there's all sorts of other stuff that comes along with that as well. Just in practical terms, the venture board is made up of 5 directors. So we've got an MD, he's obviously an exec, and then 4 non-execs, all of which have, you know, kind of bring slightly different experience and skills. And I suppose my role as chair of Arthr is to sort of be the jam in the awkward governance sandwich, which between sort of versus arthritis and Arthr. And I've got to say, at times that is really difficult to navigate, because I have really a bit of a conflict of interests. I have, you know, I have a role as versus arthritis, but I also have a role in Arthr, and sometimes they don't align easily. And I suppose my reflection is that really the challenge is managing this sort of collision of two worlds, the sort of startup commercial world and the not-for-profit world. And even though, you know, Arthr it's at arm's length and it's separate, but because it's fully owned by Versus Arthritis currently, and that might not always be the case, we might well sell some equity, I don't know, but currently it's owned by Versus Arthritis. So in the eyes of the Charity Commission, you know, that's viewed as any other subsidiary, just like any other trading subsidiary would be. And that means that it's kind of caught, in inverted commas, under all the not-for-profit regulation, right? So, and that regulation, my personal opinion, doesn't necessarily always enable entrepreneurial behavior or independence to happen easily. So that's where this kind of tension exists constantly.
And you mentioned hiring an MD. I remember this being a particularly exciting part of the process, where we had to go out and essentially find someone who was willing to quit their job and make this their career, right? That's quite a big moment to be like, they're actually normal people in the real world. Are they excited about this as much as we are? I remember advertising, recruiting for people and being amazed about the quality of the people that we were getting, and people that kind of said that they really bought into the idea and they wanted to make this their career. Like, what were your reflections on meeting all these weird and wonderful people?
I mean, exactly the same. I was really surprised at the quality and experience of some of the candidates that we were getting forward. You know, even though we were offering well below market salary, there was a real appetite from really senior people, from, you know, who are currently running really successful brands, commercial brands. You know, there was a real appetite for them to just jack it all in and get involved in this. I was really quite blown away. I think the type of social venture that we were trying to create really resonated with some of those senior people, who perhaps might have got to a stage in their career where they were a bit disillusioned by the sort of corporate machine, the corporate world, and were perhaps looking to get involved in, you know, I don't know, a new type of business, where they could bring their expertise, but had some kind of level of social ethos. So I think that was the thing that was attracting the candidates that we saw. Yeah.
I remember quite a few of them talking about being at the stage of their career where they wanted to do something good, but not wanting to go and join a charity. So this being actually quite an interesting way for them to kind of like fulfill that kind of purpose piece without actually having to enter the world of charity, which I heard it so many times. I was like, there's a really interesting pattern there, that I think more of this can actually be a really cool way of bringing talent in.
Yeah, great.
So I guess skipping ahead, there was a team. There was Bobby, then the MD, then recruited a team, and I guess for probably the past 9-12 months, Arthr has been running, and kind of like we've been incubating it. So what's been the biggest like surprises or challenges now it's become a real operating thing and you're occupying that kind of governance role?
Yeah, I suppose the first thing is to say that I really am super proud about, you know, the Arthr team really for getting a new business off the ground against a backdrop of so much difficulty this year. So that, I think I was expecting it all to go a bit wrong, actually, if I'm honest, just because the environment just looks so hostile and so difficult, and trying to set up a new business of a team that haven't actually physically met, all starting in a new, you know, a new area is just felt a bit daunting at the beginning of this year, but actually they've done it brilliantly well, and that's all credit to Bobby, the MD, for leading on that. I suppose the challenge is, I'm sorry to sort of whittle on about it, is the governance and, trying to find the sweet spot between protecting Arthur from versus arthritis in the nicest possible way, but letting enough of versus arthritis in to be able to promote and support it. So, from a personal perspective, wearing 2 hats is way harder than I ever thought it was going to be. And also, I don't have a huge team of people supporting me on the Arthur part of my job. It's predominantly me and some of my business support managers' time and Bateswell's, who are our legal partners in this. So I guess trying to balance the demands of responsibility for oversight of a new business, particularly in this environment, and embedding it into a charity governance structure that at times just seems to actively want to prevent it, alongside running a fundraising function, is way more than a full-time job. It really is. And I think, that's only going to get tougher as Arthur grows and, expands and its scope broadens, because I think that's really going to test the charity's natural desire to kind of contain and control. I think that is going to be the challenge in the next few months and years.
And then a final question before we move on to some of the questions. So given everything that you've been through over the last however many years, and all the things that you've achieved, and by the way, in front of everyone, you've been brilliant. I can't congratulate you enough for taking this journey and managing versus arthritis through this. What do you now know that you wish you knew at the beginning?
Oh God, I could talk for hours about that. I've learned so much. It's massively pushed me out of my comfort zone in good and bad ways. But I suppose if I had to sort of narrow it down to 4 things that might be helpful takeaways, I guess the first would be to, not underestimate the time and effort needed to sort of prepare the organisation to think differently in order to get to saying yes to Arthur. So that sort of groundwork. The fact that there were a lot of mindset shifts that needed to happen in relation to income generation, and risk appetite, and just thinking about sustainability and all of that within the charity before we even got to the point of pitching the venture idea. So that the laying the foundations is really, I think, just a really, really important part of the process. I suppose the second one might be, if I had the time again, I might have brought the assumptions testing forward. So where we did that real world test very quickly in the market with the CAD designs and the online shop, I probably would have done that before we did the first pitch, because having that real world data to share with the board to support the assumptions in the business model kind of took the conversation and decision making to a different place and made the proposition much less conceptual. And I think that was a really key point for, and a really key point for the trustees as well. I suppose the third thing would be, I wish someone had said to me, before you start implementing anything, Charlotte, you just need to get the right legal partner on board. Faffing about between internal and external lawyers who just didn't quite have the expertise or really want to understand what it was we were trying to do, and just wanted to sort of overlay a very traditional charity subsidiary legal agreement, just added about 6 months of wasted time. And just made my hair go a lot grayer. It really did. It was really stressful, and it just was quite costly as well. So I'd really want to avoid that if I had my time again. And I suppose lastly, just a very personal reflection. And this just might be me, but it's really easy to I think to get swept up in the innovation aspects of all of this, and all the challenges and all the great stuff that comes with that. And I personally, that's my preference, right? I like all of that. I like disrupting. I like change. I like that kind of bit of my job. That's what I like. But I don't think I really gave enough thought to the impact on my role in landing this. So I was so fixated on landing it that I probably didn't really think enough of beyond that. The responsibility of holding it all, navigating the regulatory framework, of doing something that is so new, you know, it's a great learning experience. And I feel really privileged to have been able to do that with Versus Arthritis, but it also can be really lonely when you're the only one holding all of that, because you're trying to sort of be this sort of conduit between a distant partner and the charity. I think I probably, in hindsight, would have spent more time thinking that through and just ensuring that I had the right support network around me to sort of share the load and the responsibility. And also, you don't want a single point of failure in any organisation, do you? So it's also a risk for the charity. So I think that's probably what I'd do if I had my time again.
Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you for being so open and honest and sharing the warts and all journey. And yeah, I mean, congratulations again. I think Arthr would not exist if it hasn't been for your hard work and tenacity. So you deserve everything and a lot more.
Thank you. Well, likewise, Good Innovation have been great to work with over these years as well, and I thoroughly recommend if anybody's thinking of it.
Thank you. There are a bunch of questions that have come through. So Ryan, have you been sifting them? Are you going to be question master for the last kind of like 20 minutes or so?
I've been sifting. Yeah, I think we've covered some of the questions, or Charlotte's covered some of the questions after they've been asked already. But I guess the first and most obvious place to start is there were a flurry of questions, Charlotte, when you started talking about how you measure impact, and a lot of interest and intrigue around how that actually worked. And people wondering if you could go into a bit more detail about that.
I mean, it's really simple, actually, and I'm sure, you know, Andrew and Ryan, you might want to jump in on this because you were involved as well, but we literally just took the cost of reaching a number of people and product sales. So it was really as simple as that. It was looking at how much it would cost us to sell a product, and the product we assumed would be the thing that would be the impact for the person that had bought it. So it was literally as simple as that. So the reach and the number of sales were really important in that calculation.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to add anything, Andrew.
No, I think we were lucky because impact was really simple. Someone buys a product, it's helped them. So you can just kind of like divide that by cost and you end up with a cost per impact. Yeah, we looked at expanding it in terms of multiple product holding. We looked at whether we should include the impact on the friends and family and around it all. But to be honest, we didn't really need to. We didn't need to make the figures any better. They were just great as they were.
Fantastic, thank you. Next question on the list. I think this is a combination of a question that came earlier from Lawrence and just now as well from Tim. Charlotte, just asking a bit more about how you created the resource and the investment early on up front in order to kind of get this program moving and get this work moving internally. And again, just asking you to elaborate a bit more on that and the investment pitch as such.
Yeah, so I guess there were two separate things. So I back when we started doing this in 2016, we didn't have an innovation team. I didn't have really the expertise or the available resource in the fundraising team to be able to do anything that was like this, which for me, which is why it was so important to get an outside agency in to lead on this. So that's where the value of bringing Good Innovation was really felt, because they could come in, they didn't have any history, they were independent, they could come in, they could ask the difficult questions, but in a way that was not confrontational, and it wasn't, the annoying fundraising director asking, or the innovation fundraising team, or whatever it might have been. So that really helped, and that just provided a whole load of capacity and resource right there. So we didn't really have to do much internally in the initial stages to sort of deal with that. I suppose the investment case was different. We had, as part of the investment and the business case, we factored in all the resource that we'd need. So that was covered. And in terms of the financial side of things, as I said, we were lucky that we had money in reserves that the trustees were able to access to be able to make their decision a bit easier, I think.
I think it probably helped that it was all kind of broken down in relatively small, manageable chunks. So rather than committing to like a massive program over several years, it was like, let's just do this bit, and then if that's looks like there's something there, then we can do another bit, and then we can do another bit. So there was no like one big right, we're going to need to sink a truckload of money in this and cross our fingers.
Yeah.
And building on that question, Charlotte, a little bit. You talked about some figures earlier on and how much, some big numbers that you were asking for in terms of investment. Did you consider looking for external investment at that point in time? And if not, why not?
So it did. So we did think about it, not with the trustees, and we didn't talk about it in a great amount of detail with the exec team, but certainly, you know, myself and the Good Innovation team talked about it. I think because it was so new, and because it was because there was real benefit also in versus arthritis being seen to be owning and leading this, and could likewise benefit the charity in lots of other ways, not just the income that we could withdraw back from it. It felt important for us to own it at the early stage. So there was that aspect, but then also I just don't think we could have managed bringing in a fourth party into the complexity as it was. It was bad enough with three, you know, a tripart arrangement, let alone even having a conversation with the trustees about giving away equity. I just think they would have fallen off their chair. I just don't think it wasn't the right moment. And I think, again, you know, that kind of conversation, it will come and it needs to come. I don't know when, but you know, I hope that it comes in the future, because that will mean that we're being successful. But that again will need really sensitive, careful navigation to set that up well with the finance committee, because I don't think that's instinctive in boards to be thinking about giving stuff away in that respect, I think.
Yeah, I think you were lucky that you could fund it yourself. You know, that's a good position to be in. But you know, we have set Arthr up to make it easy to bring in external money. So we have set it up to make that a perfectly viable piece in the future. And I think we are expecting that the next round of funding in a year and a half's time, that will be a live discussion. Yeah,
definitely.
Great, thanks, Charlotte. Heather had a question for you, or you and Andrew, I guess, both, around you mentioned that you had a lot of success and you were really pleasantly surprised by the applicants that you got when you reached out. How and where did you advertise the role, and where did you find these people in order to get such good quality applicants?
Gosh, just LinkedIn, wasn't it?
Yeah, LinkedIn plus a bunch of other of these kind of platforms about people looking to change career. We didn't go through any recruiters because we just thought it's a slightly weird brief, and also wanted to try and avoid paying recruiters' fees. So we essentially did it ourselves and did all the outreach. And yeah, it was great. It worked an absolute treat. It's the end of the recruitment model, basically.
If I remember correctly, it created the opposite problem of having too many people to sift through. They were such high quality.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, where to go next? So Kevin had a question, actually, Charlotte. I guess a kind of a personal reflection question for you. Thinking back to when this all started and kind of when you were in the earlier stages of this, did you have any concerns about your own skills and your own kind of skill set within driving this initiative forward in a charity? Because I guess to build on that, Charlotte, you already touched on, this is just so different, right? It's so different to how we as fundraisers and people in the sector think and act and operate. Did those thoughts creep into your head at the time?
God, 100%, and they're still creeping, and they're still there every day. I'm really conscious of my kind of professional limitations of this, and at some point I'm sure, you know, I won't be the right person to continue being chair, but at the moment that's sort of the best option I guess we've got in the charity. I mean, I did sort of for example, I signed myself up to go on a non-exec director course at the Institute of Directors which was the most horrendous experience, but also equally brilliant. I was probably, well, I was the only female in the room of 25 white middle-aged men who'd all made a lot of money in, you know, finance and wanted to have a portfolio career of giving back. So, you know, that was an experience in itself, just spending 2 days with those sorts of people, and having actually that Institute Directors course is really good. I really recommend it, but it was tough. There's a lot of role play, and it was that's a entirely different world that I'm used to. So yeah, it's there all the time. I don't think I probably can't say any more than that.
Very good, thank you, Charlotte. And a combination of questions here. James has just put this question on, but it links to a question Matthew asked earlier as well around, but again, thinking back to the earlier stages of where you are, Charlotte, you touched on the importance of getting everybody else on board with this, trustees, your peers, and how much time and effort you put into kind of engagement. Can you just elaborate on that a bit more and explain to us, I think both people are asking exactly the same question, which I'm sure you had at the time. We could invest in traditional fundraising. It's safer. We know what that is. We know what the return of the investment is. Charlotte, why are you telling us to go over there? How did you manage that tension, and kind of what was your rationale?
Do you know what? It wasn't as difficult as it sounds, to be honest, just because of where we were back then. Our fundraising RR was not good, and fundraising was not viewed well in the organisation. So I was starting from quite a low base. So I sort of felt, well, the only way is up really from here. So I'm just going to chuck some stuff at it and see what happens. But so we could, there was no real, it wasn't a question of just, you know, finding a voluntary income stream that had a bit of a glimmer of light, and we could just invest more money and maybe, you know, change the team up a bit and reap the benefits over a period of time, a sort of incremental growth. I just didn't see that as an option. I really didn't. There was too much change that needs to happen in the fundraising team and the fundraising portfolio, the voluntary portfolio back then. I guess the second thing also was this sort of financial cliff that we were hurtling towards, which at the time I felt like I was the only one that was sort of looking at the numbers and thinking, Christ, what are we going to do? Because everybody was slightly burying their head in the sands. And that's partly a culture when you've in an organization when you've got reserves, because, you know, there isn't necessarily that sort of performance drive. So I thought there's no way I'm going to be able to just significantly increase voluntary income that much to fill the gap. So it needs to be something. There needs to be a machine or an income line that can hit those scalable, sizable amounts to be able to fill the gap. And I suppose I sort of saw that we had a bit of a, you know, a 3-4 year window to get going and to see whether or not we could marry up introducing something at the time that our intellectual property patent was due to finish, which was last year. So we sort of just about hit it, but yeah. I think that's where it was. It wasn't quite as easy as increasing the voluntary income.
Right. There was a lot of interest when you started to talk about how you measure impact and how you report on that, and obviously, as I mentioned, the questions that came from that. It also made me think. I listened to Bobby talk at Bobby's the MD of Arthr at the launch a couple of weeks ago, whenever that was recently, Charlotte. And someone posed him the question at the time where it was essentially about kind of what's the return going to be. And it was really interesting to hear Bobby talk about return in the same way you've talked about that. You know, essentially he moved beyond just pure hard financial numbers, and he talked about impact as well. And you mentioned and talked about the future of Arthr, and, you know, you might bring in external investment, for example, if that's the right thing to do. Do you have any worries that as Arthr continues to grow, it becomes more venture and less social as such? So essentially, you know, do you worry that the focus will disappear from impact and will head towards purely financial return in the future?
Am I worried about it now? No, just because I think that is so hardwired into Bobby as the MD that I think it would take some shaking him to get it out. and for that view to change. So I'm not worried about it now. And also I think that we've structured the board in a way that has enough skill and views around the table to protect us against doing that. Having said that, I'm also really conscious that, you know, as businesses, you know, that it's really early days, isn't it? And as it grows, it will take a life of its own. And I don't doubt for a second that we're going to have to make some really difficult choices in the next few years about, you know, just simple things from kind of, you know, product lines, and do we expand out into services? Might there be an opportunity, for example, for Arthr to do installation in people's houses? I don't know. You know, there's lots of issues around digital technology solutions. Is that a role for Versus Arthritis to be taking that on, or is that a role for Arthr? So I think there's some lots of sort of complexities around how the business will evolve and grow, and I'm sure there'll be lots of challenges on the way, and lots of questions, as you've rightly said, that we'll need to think about. But I'd like to think that what holds it apart from everything else is the fact that we want to protect the social and the commercial aspect in equal measure. Certainly while I'm involved, that's what we'll do anyway.
Thanks, Charlotte. And I think this is the last question, and then I might just open it up to double check that I haven't missed anybody or we haven't covered anything yet. But there was a question earlier on from Ed, I believe, just asking for a bit more information. Andrew, I think you mentioned it, the time at which you realised and decided that you needed to go end to end on this. You know, you couldn't just be a curator of existing products, you needed to start right at the beginning. And the question was, why did you decide that, essentially? And I guess the obvious implication is that makes everything harder and more complicated. So why did you decide it, and how did you convince everybody?
I remember I think we looked at about 12, 15 different roles in the value chain that we could take, different bits that Versus Arthritis could plug. So we definitely didn't leap to that one. But I think when you started modeling all the financials behind it and what bits were broken, you kind of realized that, like, margin, different people are taking money from it at different points, different bits are broken. So if you want a kind of scalable commercial opportunity, it's much more kind of profitable to do the whole thing. But then also, if you just do one bit, you're reliant on another bit of the value chain doing something, and they're just not doing it very well. Like, the whole retail experience was terrible. So we could design some amazing products, but then if we stick it in one of these NHS style medical shops, you're like, well, that's not going to work. So then you kind of think, well, we have to do retail. And then you go, well, even if we do a nice retail bit, the products are crap. So then you're like, well, we have to do so it kind of came out, despite us kind of ideally not wanting to. It was just the natural implication. So I think the biggest question was about whether Versus Arthritis wanted to go that big, rather than whether it was the right thing to do.
Yeah, I think just to build on that as well, it was the numbers said it all as well, didn't they, Andrew? So when we modelled each of those interventions that you mentioned on the value chain, the numbers just didn't stack up. The cost benefit wasn't enough. The impact wasn't enough. Just fixing one bit of it wasn't going to make enough of a difference, I think. So that was also a really key factor, I think.
Great, thanks, Charlotte. And we've just had a question coming from Dominic as well. It was interesting watching when you were talking, Charlotte, about the kind of 3, 4, 5 year income projections. I've never seen so many eyebrows raised as quickly as when you mentioned that in a positive way. And that's obviously got a lot of interest. And I understand that some of this is probably sensitive and commercial, Charlotte, so please don't feel like you need to share any of it. But I guess the question was just around that figure in a bit more detail, kind of any margins, if you are open and happy to share, but obviously no.
Well, first of all, if I said 30, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to say 30. I think I said 13. So it might have been me mumbling. So 13 million by year 4. Yeah, so eyebrows are now going down. So that's a bit more palatable, doesn't it? Yeah, but still way more than we originally thought. And, you know, that is partly because when we did the original projections, you know, we were being really conservative, I think, and really prudent. And now Bobby's in post, and he's got experience of startups and scaling businesses, and he can see the potential. He's put perhaps some more validity around some of those figures. So that's what we're aiming for at the moment. Yeah, so I don't think that answers the question. Can you say it again, Ryan?
I was just sorry, Charlotte. I was just talking about within that 13. What proportion of that? It's a margin question essentially. What proportion is kind of going back to charity to fund work versus
Oh, right, I see. Yeah, so, well, I mean, that's a question for Versus Arthritis, isn't it? That's a question for the Finance Committee. So that is what the revenue projections are. Now, Versus Arthritis has a decision to make as to how much it leaves in the business to grow further, or how much it withdraws. And again, we haven't got to that point yet, but out of that 13 million, there's a sizable chunk that could be withdrawn back to the charity. Yeah, but that's a discussion to have further down the line. A nice position to be in.
It's going to be fascinating, because there's going to be it's going to really stretch the trustees to be like, do you withdraw that money, which potentially is short-term money now, but it could prohibit some of the future growth of Arthr, right? Or do you keep that money in and go for scale and have the return later? Like, particularly when you start modeling the potential kind of internationally, and the growth of the aging Chinese middle class. We've already had, I think, 2 suppliers ask if we can supply China, and you're just like, oh my God. So it's going to be fascinating in a few years to really stress test the continuing appetite for Versus Arthritis to grow versus cash in.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that international point's a really important one, because those figures, the 13 million, is not based on going to any markets outside of the UK. So, that has got the potential to be significantly different if we can, if we decide to, to start selling in those markets earlier than 23, 24.
Go on, Andrew.
I was just going to answer Kevin's question. Arthur's long-term ambitions. I can tell you what Bobby's long-term ambitions are for Arthr, which is essentially being a £100 million business. So he wants to expand. He wants to go international. He wants to expand out of products, to go to services, to go to membership, and to be essentially the place for people with arthritis, which I think is a brilliant ambition.
I mean, in terms of Versus Arthritis ambition, I don't think we've talked about 10 years. I think we're living a bit day to day at the moment about how this, is embedded within the organisation, and plus the fact that everyone's super distracted on the pandemic and everything at the moment. So, but I'm really looking forward to having those conversations with the Finance Committee, because I think that is going to stretch and that is going to test them, and I think that's those are the right conversations to have, for sure.
Be really interesting to see, Charlotte, whether all the work you've put into I guess shifting those mindsets and appetite to risk, and how that continues going forward when these decisions come about, like you say, in the future.
Yeah
we shall see. So we're very conscious of time, and we've got a few minutes left, and I guess I just wanted to wrap up the session for us now. So first and foremost, just to say thank you very much. Thank you very much, firstly, of course, to Charlotte for giving us your time today, for being so open, to coin an Andrew phrase, to warts and all, and really be honest, because I know how interesting and useful that is for everybody. But also thank you to everybody for coming along today. I know you're very busy, and diaries are always a challenge, so thanks for finding the time. I guess I wanted to finish by saying that we recognise that this work it's really exciting, but it's really difficult as well. And Charlotte's really nicely brought to life for us today some of those challenges. But I come back to sort of something you said, Charlotte, at the time, which was timing is everything. So at Versus Arthritis, the conditions were right, but also similar to what Kevin said at the start, if we think about where we are as fundraisers and as a sector more broadly, we're all facing a bit of a challenge, and that challenge has only been made more acute. Kevin touched on, how do we do more with less? How do we deliver more impact, more money with less money, less resource, which has come out in the questions we've had today as well. And that's essentially why that we've built an end-to-end offer of how we can help clients go all the way through this journey. And Charlotte's talked about that a little bit as well. There are 3 big chunks to it. It starts with the audit phase. The audit moves on to what we are calling labs now, and those are labs which get things off pieces of paper. They're the fake shop that Charlotte touched on, and they're the really exciting, actually really invigorating bit, because it's not just slides, it's not just spreadsheets, because there were a lot of those that came at the time, but the idea begins to become real. And then moving on from labs, Charlotte's also touched on the venture studio, and those 3 chunks of work are essentially designed to help people get from where, Charlotte, you were in 2016 to where you are now with Arthr, which is in market, and all these really exciting plans for the future. But the other 2 things I just wanted to quickly touch on, and I'm sure Andrew will nod his head in kind of bitter experience as well, that we've learned through this process, that there are 2 really important things that need to underpin this work, but for this work to work well. First is around strategy and commercial strategy, and kind of having that strategy in place to provide clarity around what and why. So we're doing a lot more work with clients on that, but most importantly as well, and really interesting, is we're doing a lot more work around culture. So Charlotte, I'm sure you would agree that culture can be one of the biggest barriers to this, and it manifests itself, you talked about it from decision-making, trustees' perspective, but all the way through to actually how some of these projects are delivered. So just to say that we're doing some really interesting work around helping organisations take an experimental approach to adopting culture, the opposite of a 3-year change programme that we've all been involved in and never really work. The final thing for me to say is, I guess, just to recognise that we've got people here today that are in different stages of this journey. We've got some people that have done an audit already, some people that are thinking about an audit, but we're just really passionate and keen about doing more of this type of work and helping more people like Charlotte get to having more Arthurs in the world and achieving that type of impact. So it goes without saying that we'd love to keep talking to you guys, and you'll probably be hearing from Kevin and I in the near future as well. So that's it from us. Thank you so much, everybody. Thanks for giving your time, and nice to see you all again. And thanks again, Charlotte.
My pleasure. Thank you. Bye.
Yeah. Bye, Charlotte.